underneath the physical text. And he starts to lose his identity. And now I have to dance around this a little bit because there are a couple of what I'll call special effects that happen.
All sorts of data from all kinds of cells. So I asked him to pick one cell that was strictly well understood and bring that data along. Pons replied that he had this data, was willing to bring it and present it, but he never did. As Linford recalled, when I asked him in the smaller group, initially he just deflected the question and kept going. I told him that if he would present the data in the very beginning, that would allow people in the room to focus their questions on various aspects. We didn't do it. So he got a half hour into his presentation, someone asked it again, basically ignored the question. Finding that there were a lot of people around the room who had asked questions that would have gone at it, I asked the question a little bit more specifically. He said he didn't bring the data and couldn't present it. That was exasperating. For the first time, gave me the feeling that if the data didn't exist at all, there were major restrictions on what he was willing to release in terms of information. After 2 seminars and another press briefing, Pons met with the director of Los Alamos, Siegfried Hecker. They discussed the possibility of a collaboration, and Pons seemed agreeable. If nothing else, the Utah chemist said he needed an inexpensive source of heavy water. He asked whether Los Alamos could get it for him cheap. Hecker assured him that would be no problem. Palo Alto. In the past 10 years, Joe Shurkin, public relations officer at Stanford University, had organized 3, maybe 4 press conferences. You have to win the Nobel Prize to get one out of me, he said. On April 18th, he had 3 in one day. 2 could be explained because not all the press could get to Stanford in time for the first one. And Shurkin liked to separate the written press from the television people, which explained the third. It was all for cold fusion. Robert Huggins said the official Stanford announcement, a student's press room material scientists had run the comparison that the physics community insisted upon. The results were consistent with those of Pons and Fleischmann. Hawkins and his researchers had run a heavy water cell versus a light water cell, and heavy water cell quite simply had run hotter. The effect was real and substantial, and they had confirmed it repeatedly. Something is happening, Huggins said. We don't know what it is. He added that they had eliminated any possibility that it was some weird chemical reaction. We seem to leave only some less weird chemical reaction, or some nuclear reaction. Huggins would not go quite that far. We have a lot of ideas, but don't believe any of them, he said. There are those who have no ideas and believe all of them. Like those of MIT or Harvard or Caltech, an official Stanford University announcement is not something to be taken lightly. Huggins, in fact, quickly took to referring to himself in cold fusion meetings with Huggins Stanford, as though it was patronymic. As Jim Brophy would say after the Utah claims had been rocked by serious criticism from MIT, albeit MIT and raised with Stanford, so the point was not lost on Brophy either.
So we're all in the midst of these leaves and branches within this
Book 2 of ideas of our complexities and substances. So in short, the idea we have of spirit compared with the idea we have of body stands thus: the substance of spirit is unknown to us, so is the substance of body equally unknown to us. 2 primary qualities or properties of body, solid coherent parts and impulse, we have distinct clear ideas of, so likewise we know and have distinct clear ideas of 2 primary qualities or properties of spirit: thinking and the power of action, power of beginning or stopping several thoughts or emotions. We have also ideas of several qualities inherent in bodies, have the clear distinct ideas of them, which qualities are but the various modifications of the extension of cohering solid parts and their motion. We have likewise ideas of the several modes of thinking: believing, doubting, intending, fearing, hoping, all which are but the several modes of thinking. We have also ideas of willing, moving the body consequent to it, with the body itself too. For us has been shown spirit is capable of motion. These are body and spirit compared. The notion of spirit involves no more difficulty than that of body. Lastly, if this motion of immature spirit may have perhaps some difficulties in it not easy to be explained, we have therefore no more reason to deny or doubt the existence of such spirits. We don't have to deny or doubt the existence of body, because the notion of body is cumbered with some difficulties, very hard and perhaps impossible to explain or understood by us. For I would fain have instanced anything in our notion of spirit more perplexed, under a contradiction, the very notion of body includes in it the divisibility in infinitum of a finite extension, involving us whether we grant or deny it, and consequences impossible to be explicated, or made our apprehensions consistent. Consequences that carry greater difficulty, more perhaps absurdity than anything can fall from the notion of an immaterial knowing substance. We know nothing beyond our simple ideas, which we are not allowed to wonder at, since we having but some few superficial ideas of things, discovered to us only by the senses from without or by the mind, reflecting on what it experiments in itself within, having knowledge beyond that, much less of the internal constitution, and the true nature of things being destitute of faculties to obtain it. Therefore, experimenting and discovering in ourselves knowledge, and the power of voluntary motion, certain as we experiment or discovering things without us, the cohesion and separation of solid parts, which is the extension motion of bodies, we have as much reason to be satisfied with the motion of material spirits with the notion of body, the existence of the one as well as the other. This is, I don't know.
And to restore my positive and enlightened.
Although a similar convergence can be achieved more simply by adding a handful of non-super bosons, and finally supersymmetry, SUSY, became a cornerstone of and necessary to superstring theory, the dominant speculative theory of particle physics. One of the strongest motivations for constructing the Large Hadron Collider, on finding the Higgs, was to find superparticles. In order for SUSY to help the standard model of naturalist this problem, superparticles should exist at energies reachable by the LHC. During the Collider's first run, the anticipation of superparticles at CERN was palpable. It felt as if a bomb had been set up complete with the banner, "Welcome home, SUSY." With superparticles not shown up at the party, the fact that the expected superparticles had not been seen puts many theorists, including string theorists, in a scientifically uncomfortable position. Max, you had a vivid dream last night in which you saw a unicorn in your backyard. The dream was so vivid that the next day you go into your backyard and look around, expecting to find your unicorn, but it's not there. That's the position string theorists and other SUSY proponents now find themselves in. You may claim correctly, even though you know now there's no unicorn in the backyard, the belief and expectation that the unicorn is actually hiding in the closet has increased. You're narrowing in on finding your unicorn. This is precisely the argument SUSY proponents are presenting now that the LHC has failed to find superparticles in the electroweak energy scale. Yes, it's correct, the probability of the unicorns in the closet, the superparticles only found during the current LHC run, has gone up. But do you know what has gone up more? The probability of the unicorn and superparticles do not exist at all. A unicorn would be a wonderful magical animal. Maybe an SUSY and superstrings, which don't exist. It's time to think about other animals. This is another Indian one. Bury my heart at Wounded Knee. Several of them wore the big blue army coats they had captured up north. They could see that General Hancock did not like this. He was wearing the same kind of coat with shoulder ornaments with shining medals on it. He received them in a haughty, blustering manner, letting them see the power of his 1,400 soldiers, including their 7th Cavalry commanded by hard backsides Custer. The General Hancock had his artillerymen fire out some cannons for their benefit. They decided to name him Old Man of the Thunder. Well, their friend Tall Chief Wynkoop was there. They were suspicious from the very beginning of Old Man of the Thunder. Instead of going to the next day to talk, he summoned them to a night council. They consider this a bad sign to hold council at night. I don't find many chiefs here, Hancock complained. What was the reason? I have a great deal to say to the Indians. I want to talk to them all together. Tomorrow I'm going to your camp. The Cheyennes did not like to hear this. The women and children were back in the camp, many of them survivors of the horrors of Sand Creek 3 years before. Would Hancock bring his 1,400 soldiers and thunder guns down upon them again? The chiefs sat in silence with the light of the campfire playing upon their great faces, waiting for Hancock to continue. I have heard that a great many Indians want to fight. Very well, we are here and we're in our counterpart for war. If you offer peace, you know the conditions. If you offer war, look out for the consequences. He told them about the railroad. He heard rumors of it, the iron track coming out past Fort Riley, heading straight for the Smoky Hill country. The white man is coming out here so fast that nothing can stop him, Hancock boasted. Come from the east and come from the west like a prairie on fire in a high wind. Nothing can stop him. The reason for it is, the whites are numerous people and they are spreading out. They require room and cannot help it. Those on one sea in the west wish to communicate with those living on another sea in the east, and that is the reason they are building these roads, these wagon roads and roads and telegraphs. You must not let you young men stop them. You must keep your men off the roads. I have no more to say. I will wait the end of your council to see whether you want war or peace. Hancock sat down, his face expectant. His interpreter completed his last remark, but the Cheyennes remained silent, staring across the campfire at the generals and officers. A last tall bull lighted a pipe, exhaled smoke, passed around the circle. He arose, folded his red and black blanket to free his right arm, and offered his hand to Old Man of the Thunder. You sent for us, Tall Bull said. We come here. We never did the white man any harm. We don't intend to. Our agent Colonel Lincoln was supposed to meet here. Whenever you want to go to Smoky Hill, you can go on any road. When we come on the road, your young men must not shoot us. We're going to be friends with the white man. You say you're going to your village tomorrow. If you go, I shall have no more to say to you there than here. I've said all I want to say. This is the everything store about Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Walmart and Scott ultimately rejected the idea of outsourcing a crucial part of Walmart's online operation to Amazon. The conversation between two retailers never developed further, and the meeting remained a quirk of history. $10 suggestion of what might have been. Two companies would continue on separate paths, which years later would converge to produce a fierce rivalry. February 2001, Ravi Surya reared his head again. He published another report that questioned Amazon's reserve of capital. With Amazon facing $130 million in annual interest expenses on his debt, given the prospect of his continued losses, Surya predicted that the company would face a cash shortage by the end of the year. This time, Amazon made it personal. Spokesman Bill Curry reported in an interview that Surya's report was silly. Warren Jensen paid a personal visit to Lehman Vice Chairman Howard Clark and John Doerr called Dick Full, Chief Executive of the investment bank, and implored him to have the firm review Surya's research. Years later, over cocktails in Midtown Manhattan's Trump Bar, with its dim lights and dark polished wood, Surya complained that Amazon exerted unbearable pressure on him during that time. He wanted to fire me. Everyone at Lehman hated my guts during those months, he says. Every time I picked up the phone, someone was screaming at me. Surya now helps run a hedge fund and has a bitter view of his sister with the online retailer. Amazon was like a high school bully picking on an elementary school kid. I was 29 years old. It was a character-defining moment for them, and as far as I could see, they failed it miserably. It ruined my life for 2 years. Soon believes Bezos is deranged and probably knows that he hasn't bought anything from Amazon since he tangled with the company. There's no doubt the investors were keen in Surya's analysis. February research report has last Lehman Brothers before departing for the hedge fund to Chesney Capital Management. The Amazon stock rolling toward the ignominious land of the single digits had other repercussions as well. In regulatory papers filed by his lawyer that month, Bezos revealed intentions to sell a small parcel of stock worth about $12 million. Since Lehman had allowed Amazon to see a version of Surya's report before it was published, the timing of the stock sale suggests the Securities and Exchange Commission that Bezos was deliberately dumping Amazon's shares before bad news was made public. In retrospect, one could see it was the farthest thing from the truth. Bezos remained completely convinced of the eventual success of his venture. The SEC, which had been hounded by critics for whiffing on the dot-com bubble, announced an investigation into the possibility of insider trading. The investigation went nowhere. The New York Times, among other publications, blasted news prominently on the front of its business section. I don't care who you are, how much trust you have, says Warren Jensen. It's not fun picking up the Times and seeing your picture above the fold accused of insider trading. We're all products of what we've been through. One of the things that make Jeff the person he is, that scar does not heal easily.
The result of one vast breeding line. It really takes a lot of concepts from philosophy and from literary theory.
Wrinkles in Time.
And turns them into an idea.
Operated according to different laws than it does today, reality and cosmology sometimes evades our comprehension. Though the pedigree of Big Bang cosmology reaches back to an idea developed between 1927 and 1933 by George Henry Lemaitre, a Belgian priest, it wasn't until 1964 that the theory emerged as a dominant explanation of how the universe came to be the way it is. In that year, 2 American radio astronomers discovered what appeared to be a dim afterglow of the ancient cataclysmic event. That afterglow, an all-pervasive hum of radiation, with temperature equivalent of a little more than 3 degrees Kelvin, 3 degrees above absolute zero, is known as cosmic background radiation. It provides us with a faded snapshot of the universe as it was some 300,000 years after the Big Bang. It is within the background radiation that my colleagues and I hope to discover our wrinkles in time, the holy grail of cosmology. One of the greatest challenges to the Big Bang theory has been to explain how matter is distributed through the ever-expanding space of the cosmos. It is possible to imagine that all matter would have been scattered evenly through space, making the universe a homogeneous cloud of gas with an average density of about 1 hydrogen atom every 10 cubic meters. For comparison, the air we breathe contains 3 to the 10 to 25th atoms per cubic meter, mainly atoms of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon, all which are bulkier atoms than hydrogen. Had the universe today, some 50 billion years after it formed, been virtually unending cloud of gas, the night sky would be unrelentingly black, and we would not be here to observe it. However, we know from our very existence something in the evolution of the universe caused matter to condense to form stars and planets, and ultimately life, not just life on Earth, but with probability approaching 100% in millions of other planets, too, including some in our own Milky Way. Again, it is possible to imagine that stars like our own sun, with its orbiting planets, could have been distributed evenly throughout the universe, a uniform cloud of countless billions of points of light in the night sky. Again, we know from our own experience that is not the case.
You'll notice that he uses hypotaxis to an absurd degree. I believe it's deliberately absurd. Much of the book is dealing with absurdism. But hypotaxis is where you simply just stack up subordinate clause on subordinate clause on subordinate.
Another one by Jeff Bezos, The Book of Bezos.
So you introduce a subject.
No one had been hired yet to pack books, so when volumes rose and the company fell behind on shipping, Bezos, Kaplan, and others would descend to the basement at night to assemble customer orders. Next day, Bezos, Mackenzie, or an employee would drive the boxes to UPS to the post office. The packing work was arduous and often lasted well into the night. Employees assembled orders on the floor, wrapping books in a cohesive cardboard that stuck to itself but not anything else. Last summer, Nicholas Lovejoy, a former DE Shaw employee who had left the hedge fund to teach high school math in Seattle, joined the company part-time with the obvious suggestion of adding packing tables to the warehouse. That tidy anecdote quickly made the catalog of Jeffisms, still being repeated 20 years later. I thought that was the most brilliant idea I'd ever heard in my life, Bezos said in the speech, finding the story so freshly amusing that he accompanied it with a honking laugh. Bezos tapped Lovejoy to assist with recruiting and told him to go hire the smartest people he knew. So like David Shaw, Bezos wanted all of his employees to be high IQ brainiacs. Lovejoy brought in 4 friends from his alma mater, Reed College, one of whom was Laurel Canaan, 24-year-old carpenter who was planning to return to school to become a Shaw State scholar. It never happened. Can't help build the much-needed packing tables. He formally joined the company and took over operations in the warehouse. Lovejoy finally allowed Amazon to expand out of the sonic jungle room to take over the entire basement. One of the first things Cannon did upon being hired was give up coffee. You can't do a job like that on caffeine. You have to do it on carbs, he says. It was an eclectic team operating under unusual circumstances in challenging environments. Together they took their first tentative steps in an exotic river called the Internet. To everyone's surprise, they all got swept under the swift current. First week after its official launch, they took 12,000 orders and shipped 846 books, according to Eric Dillon, one of Amazon's investors. Next week, they took 40,000 orders and shipped 7,000 worth of books. So they're behind from the get-go and scrambling to catch up. This is a Sovereign Profession. This is from, where is this from? This is from The Social Transformation of American Medicine. The Boundaries of Public Health. They see a doctor or a dentist. When they were examined the next year, their health problems would still be there. If only we could take some of the money we use for examining and re-examining children, paid out the most important kinds of work done, we'd be able actually to accomplish something, a school health administrator to the Public Health Convention. There would be no integration of school health programs with health services, because there was no integration of other public health activities. Private interests created a barrier to any unified organization. From reform to the checkup, the modernization of dirt and the new public health. The economic boundaries of public health are determined partly by constraints of cost. Not simply direct cost of public health programs to taxpayers, but the indirect cost of such measures to business and society at large. In the first half of the 19th century, some authorities attributed epidemics to contagion or recommended quarantines, an economically damaging measure because of the disruption of commerce. Others ascribed epidemics to miasmas and advised general cleanups of the environment. The environmental approach may have been favored by commercial interests because it was less disruptive than the closing of markets. Post-op cleanups and quarantines are both costly responses to disease. The advent of bacteriology not only increased the effectiveness of public health efforts, it also reduced their cost to society by doing away with indiscriminate interventions. The shift to more specified measures, such as regulation of the water and milk supply, provide the basis for an accommodation between public health and business interests. The more narrow focus of bacteriology also provided a rationale for public health officials to disengage themselves from commitments to moral and social reform. A central element in this accommodation between health and commerce was a new conception of dirt. Ideas about dirt have serious political implications, as will be evident from moments reflection on today's struggles over toxic chemicals, radioactive waste, and other environmental pollutants. A broad conception of dirt may imply a need for a correspondingly large investment in cleaning things up. More narrow conception may be much cheaper. Through the century, Charles V. Chapin, Health Commissioner of Providence, Rhode Island, a leading figure in the field, pointed out that early public health legislation, influenced by the field theory of disease, made no distinction between dangerous dirt and dirt not dangerous. The warfare was waged against everything decaying and everything which smelled bad. The old sanitarian shepherd argued have been preoccupied with vague miasmas like sewer gas, which is effort in diffuse measures. General cleanup does not necessarily remove all human fecal matter from the water supply. Even that under the germ theory did not necessarily bring a precise understanding of how infection was transmitted. Mistakenly seeing danger in foul air and contaminated physical objects, public health authorities thought it necessary to isolate contagious disease hospitals and to fumigate all objects with the sick came into contact. Scientists learned that disease-causing bacteria do not travel long distances by air and became more skeptical of the value of such measures as fumigation. In 1906, Chapin attacked fumigation as a fetish, and the next decade other cities followed the example of Providence in adding to practice. New outlook brought with a radically reduced view of the requirements of public health. Events that dirt per se did not cause infectious disease, Chapin dismissed general measures for cleanliness. Make no difference no difference in cities' mortality, wrote in 1902. Whether the streets are clean or not, whether its garbage is removed promptly or allowed to accumulate, whether as a plumbing law. Once the community learned to dispose of the excreta, Chapin believed environmental sanitation was not a public health issue. Plus, he had poor housing itself produces as much as he said, explaining why he thought housing was not a public health matter. A short public book, How to Avoid Infection, published in 1917, he wrote that it was more important to remove adenoids from the child than to remove ashes from the backyard. Personal hygiene could replace public health activities. Wash the hands well before eating and always have to use the toilet. Teach the children by precept and especially by example. Modern sanitary science enables the individual to protect himself even if his health department is inefficient. Personal hygiene was cheaper too. The introduction and the purification of municipal water supply may require millions. Wash times before eating and after toilet costs nothing. This is Bruce Babbitt. Not sure what book. My favorite time of day is between 4 and 6:30 in the morning. Sharon was told. Nobody's up, nobody's bothering. The dark turns to light and the birds come to life. Listen for the forest falcons. They have a haunting cry and they're usually up before anything else. And as it gets lighter, the clay-colored robins and parakeets come in. The energy level of nature is at its peak in the morning. Everything just dances. When light came in the sky, Sharon walked to the zoo across savannah grass, beaded with dew. The sound of her swish sometimes startled fox, and she watched us scamper the bush. Those who happened to arrive through the visitor's entrance, it was about over Cholito intensified. She found herself using the back gate more often. It was usually that way. The scarlet macaws were the first animals he saw when he came in the front. Sharon couldn't pass the birds without her stomach clenching. At the commissary, she kicked off her sandals, slipped into a pair of rubber boots. It was amazing to walk the zoo with Sharon in the morning. He almost came running to her. Jaguars leapt down from high branches. Puma scampered over dead leaves. One morning, as we approached a cloudy pond held crocodiles, turtles, and pancake-sized fish on its cichlids, I watched in astonishment as a ripping flotilla came toward a full charge. What's going on? I asked. I just can't see over here. They don't know it's you. It's my flip-flops, she said. Each of us have our own way of walking. It's as distinctive as your fingerprint, your stride, your pace, your weight, whether you shuffle. Animals pick up on that. Gravel is especially good at carrying the sound. The fish pick up the vibrations. It wasn't Sharon's personality drawing the animals. They equated with food. She explained that she tossed a handful of raw chicken in the pond. That's the main thing that drives animals, food. Food and mating, mostly food. If you spot an animal on the wild and want to know why it's there, look around and see what it's eating. Why, here, I asked. This is where the animals are, she said. Some morning she drove the British Forces Broadcasting Service, the FBS station. The FBS broadcasts from a military base at the airport and serves to homesick soldiers. Sharon pulled 3 shifts a week to bring in some extra money. I dropped her off there one day for borrowing a truck to get some groceries. I'm out from Belize City. Sharon came on the radio. Check out the weather forecast. Said it's moist, unstable for the next 24 hours, but some of you like that. Sharon's thunderstorms, especially showers and thunderstorms, in the south. Here in the studio, it's blistering hot, and you know why, don't you? We're 99.1, Belize PFBS. Marilyn Manson's version of Tainted Love came on. A smile crossed my face. Sharon's radio persona never felt to crack me up. At the zoo, she was Sergeant Charles, boss lady in West Parts. The FBI, she slipped behind the microphone and became Sharon Martala, Rowdy Rock Mama. At the grocery store, I picked up some peanut butter, bread, bottled water, copy of $1. When I got back in the truck, Sharon was thanking the British Force Butcher for saving bones for problem jaguars. Project Rehab has getting rid of cats. He's getting close to you. One of the ways to do that, I think, is next time. Remember, jump. You see that? Kids can be everyone on the surfer done. I'm probably going to record the entire question of the speakers.
Who's sexy? What's the deal with all the big